The climate crisis is here. Time's slipping away to stop the worst effects of global warming, and we need solutions. Hosted by me, Molly Wood, How We Survive dives deep into the economics, the tech, and the human stories behind those solutions. From billionaires trying to monopolize lithium mines to business rivalries so fierce that one CEO was dragged off a plane by federal authorities. How We Survive, following the money to the end of the world because our survival might depend on it. Listen on Odyssey and everywhere you get your podcasts.
What has or has not changed in the last 3 decades? It's wild. 30 years ago next week, Anita Hill showed insane courage. She stood up in front of America and specifically to an all-male, all-white Senate Judiciary Committee to testify that her boss, Supreme Court Justice nominee Clarence Thomas, had sexually harassed her. This was a landmark moment for these issues and inspired countless women to come forward with their own stories, to file complaints, and to even run for office. Anita Hill has a new book. It's called Believing, where she argues that until we recognize gender violence as a public problem, demanding public solutions, nothing will change, and that the work isn't done. Anita Hill, of course, a leading figure in the fight for women's rights and against gender-based violence, a university professor of social policy, law, and women's and gender studies at Brandeis University, and that book, Believing. Anita, thanks so much for joining us this morning. It is our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on your show.
You know, you mentioned the term, and it comes up again and again, gender-based violence. Look, that is extremely prevalent. It impacts nearly every aspect of a woman's life. Can we, before we get going into it and how we solve it and what needs to be done, can you just explain it so that people can understand it? What specifically you're talking about when you talk about gender-based violence?
Yes, I'm talking about a whole array of behavior. And I come to this because I've heard from people all over the world about their experiences. And I wanted to look at and find a way to capture it and all of the interrelated behavior that I've heard about in one phrase. And so I chose gender-based violence, and gender violence sometimes is referred to in the title. And what it includes, specifically in the accounts that I cover in the book, it includes bullying in school, particularly for kids who identify as queer or present their gender in a way that is not conventionally accepted by their peers or the teachers that they have. It includes sexual harassment and sexual assault in schools and on college campuses. It includes intimate partner violence. It includes sexual harassment, assault, and extortion in workplaces. It includes things like behavior like stalking. And these are, as I say, the phrase is my way of capturing what survivors and victims have told me.
Yeah, gender-based violence. And our time with you is short, so I don't want to really look back and diagnose 30 years ago and what happened. You've done that before, but I do want to, look ahead. So it's the 30th anniversary of those Clarence Thomas hearings and you standing up. When you look back, what has or has not changed in the last 3 decades from your perspective?
Well, we've gotten more aware. We have a different conversation. We have, I think, raised the public consciousness of the problem and the prevalence of the problem. Me Too helped with that tremendously, but so did all of the research and all of the activism that has happened over the past 30 years. So that is something that has changed. But we still don't have policies and practices and procedures in place to address it. And every day, practically, we have stories in the press about the fact that we don't have procedures to address the problem. Mm-hmm. The most recent, of course, is the story that is in the media today about the women's soccer teams around the country and their inability to get any relief from the abuse that they're saying they experienced from one of the soccer coaches in this country.
Yeah.
And it's not just that one team. We understand it is it is present throughout women's soccer.
And for every story that we hear, too, there are so many people that don't come forward because it's not easy to come forward, right? I mean, that becomes your label, that becomes your life, and it takes a lot of courage to come forward like you did. So you talk about that we have made progress, but that there's still issues out there. So I guess what specific changes would you like to see happen in government or courts or the workplace or schools and communities to combat this gender-based violence?
Well, first of all, I would like to see our culture change. We have now a culture of denial and dismissiveness when it comes to gender-based violence, whether we're talking about rape and sexual assault or sexual harassment or even bullying, where we still say to people, really, it's not that bad. You shouldn't make a big fuss out of this behavior. Boys will be boys. This is just what happens, and you have to learn to deal with it. And over again, I say that we're grooming people to accept their own abuse, and we're grooming abusers to accept their own bad behavior and not to expect anyone to do anything about it. So I think we need to make cultural changes. I also think that, as I pointed out, our policies and practices either are non-existent or they are colossal failures in many cases. So we can think, when we talk about a spectacular failure, we can think about what happened to the U.S. gymnast who, years before Larry Nassar was convicted of child abuse, had complained to the FBI about their experience of abuse by him. And the FBI agent, two agents, in fact, were contacted and stories were told. And nevertheless, there was not adequate follow-up. There was no real investigation. And the Larry Nassar went on to abuse reportedly 70 to 100 additional victims.
Yeah.
So we've got to change our practices. And we've got to change our policies to make sure that they are doing what they're intended to do, which is to protect as opposed to keep people out and silence people.
Yeah, and we keep saying that it'll never happen again, that we can't happen, it won't happen, and then it happens again. We're talking with Anita Hill, that book, Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence. Do you think, though, Anita, I wonder what role social media and the hashtags, too, like, we've had Me Too and we've had Time's Up. What is the role of social media in this?
Well, it's to bring greater awareness,
Yep.
for people to be able to tell their stories and affirm their experiences. And it should build a sense of urgency in our leaders to address it. We need leaders who are going to acknowledge this problem, first of all, acknowledge the severity of it and the harm that it is doing, not only to the individuals, but to people who are around them, to their communities, to their workplaces and their college communities, but as well to our nation. It's a black mark on our nation when we have the kinds of hearings that we had in 2018 and in 1991. It's a black mark on our nation when there's a military scandal that occurs routinely and that doesn't seem to abate. It's a black mark on our nation when our elected officials seem to turn a blind eye to the experiences of people who do come forward. And our institutions like the FBI drop the ball completely and leave children to be abused. So our leaders need to step up.
Yeah. Anita, last thing for you. When you came forward 30 years ago next week in 1991, were you fully aware? Were you fully aware at the time that this is what people would know you for forever? And I guess now that, of course, that's been the case, you're in history books and your name's associated with that and people know you for that. Are you okay with that?
I've come to terms with it. It wasn't where I started, but once I embraced the idea that I could make a difference, then I will take that fact that that's what I will be associated with and I get consolation. I remember talking to a class of high school students, and a young man came to the mic and asked the question, how does it feel to know that you've changed the world?
Yeah.
I'm not sure even then and even now that I think that I've changed the world, but I am absolutely sure that when I hear questions like that from young people, that I need to change the world and that I need to work hard to do so.
Yeah. Well, look, it took courage then, and it takes courage now to continue the fight. So we appreciate all the work that you've done and appreciate your time this morning, Anita.
Thank you.
Anita Hill, that book, Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence.
Keeping up with the flood of news every single day can be quite stressful. There is climate change happening. There's the pandemic, labor movements, Nicki Minaj's cousin's friend. Hi, I am Gideon Resnick, host of Crooked Media's What a Day. Each week, Travelle Anderson, Priyanka Arabindi, Josie Duffy Rice, and I are going to break down the biggest news stories of the day in a way that hopefully doesn't always make you want to cry. New episodes of What a Day drop every weekday at 5 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Odyssey, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
The climate crisis is here. Time's slipping away to stop the worst effects of global warming, and we need solutions. Hosted by me, Molly Wood, How We Survive dives deep into the economics, the tech, and the human stories behind those solutions. From billionaires trying to monopolize lithium mines to business rivalries so fierce that one CEO was dragged off a plane by federal authorities. How We Survive, following the money to the end of the world because our survival might depend on it. Listen on Odyssey and everywhere you get your podcasts.